If the longer matches, pay-per-view main events, and lack of farting gimmicks are any indication, we are now in the midst of a women's revolution in the WWE. Last week, we looked at the evolution of WWE's women's division from its oft-forgotten competitive highs in the 1980s to its sadly remembered misogynistic lows in the early 2000s. In this part, we'll look at the women's revolution that took the WWE by storm in the 2010s and turned bathroom break divas into main event superstars. I'm Psycho Candy, and this is the History of Women's Wrestling, Part 2. To understand where this whole revolution first started, we have to go back a long time ago to a galaxy far, far away. A scary place where wrestlers are actually treated like superstars, storylines actually have continuality, and matches actually have meaning. We have to look to NXT. By 2013, NXT had gained a reputation for being the best weekly hour of WWE programming by, well, consistently being the best weekly hour of WWE programming. With guys like Bray Wyatt, Bo Dallas, and Adrian Neville, NXT was a welcome alternative to the whole how fast can we kill Dan Bryan's momentum storyline we were witnessing on the main roster. But things were about to get a whole lot better. In mid-2013, the savior of women's wrestling herself, Stephanie McMahon, would announce a tournament to crown the first ever NXT Women's Champion. The highly contested tournament featured some of NXT's brightest female stars, such as Paige, Sasha Banks, Emma, Summer Rae, Alicia Fox, Tamina, Aksana. Okay, so it wasn't the G1, but the tournament finals between Paige and Emma was a true classic and showcased just how talented the women of NXT truly were. Paige would end up winning the tournament and would give us something we hadn't seen on the main roster in decades: a strong women's title run. She had great feuds and matches with women like Bayley, Sasha Banks, and even gave us NXT's first great female feud against Emma. While the women were an afterthought on the main roster, in NXT, they were one of the most exciting parts. Actually, speaking of the main roster, things were finally starting to look up. Yeah, we were still getting dumb storylines and worthless matches, but beyond this hazy mist of mediocrity, there was one bright spot: AJ Lee. Lee burst onto the scene in 2012 as part of the captivating love triangle between her, CM Punk, and Daniel Bryan. By 2013, she had become Divas champion, beating Caitlyn in some pretty damn fine matches. While these matches were a far cry from the Paige-Emma matches we were seeing in NXT, they were a vast improvement from the Divas matches we were forced to watch a few months earlier. Lee would break barriers as the new women's champ, being the focal point of numerous historic female moments. In July, her and Caitlyn would have the first women's contract signing in WWE history. In December, she would defend her title against Natalya in the longest women's match since 1987. And of course, who could forget her own version of the legendary CM Punk pipe bomb?
Do you want to know what I see when I look in that ring? A bunch of cheap, expendable, useless women.
With Paige and AJ quickly gaining steam with their cool, anti-diva aesthetics, fans began to dream of a feud between the two trailblazers. What kind of matches would they have? Who would win? Could this be the next Trish vs. Lita we'd all been waiting for? Fans began to endlessly speculate. And in early 2014, our dreams finally came true.
I am the savior of your Divas division. I am the Divas division.
This has been some night. And look at this. Oh! Paige! The cover! Hooks the leg off the Paige shoulder. She did it!
And we learned that like hair, teeth, and any comments you have on your girlfriend's clear weight gain, some things are just better left in your head. Not since Baywatch, The Zune, or Jamarcus Russell had something so hyped been such a letdown. Instead of focusing on the rebellious aspects that made these two women stars, like they did with Rock vs. Austin or Hogan vs. Sting, the WWE went back to their Diva Era nonsense, displaying the two women as ladies who were suddenly in this nonsensical game of lesbian one-upmanship. You hug me, I kiss you, you kiss me, I stare at you. It was a mess. And I get how this whole thing was once appealing to horny 13-year-old boys in 1999. But in the glorious age of internet porn, the whole lesbian angle just doesn't cut it anymore, okay? Meanwhile, in NXT, things had somehow gotten better since the departure of Paige. Sasha Banks, Charlotte Flair, Becky Lynch, and Bayley would step up, dubbing themselves the Four Horsewomen. These women would run NXT for the better part of a year, and it seemed like no matter which of them was in a match, they always stole the show. The Four Horsewomen era of NXT peaked in July 2014 with the incredible feud between Sasha Banks and Bayley. After having what was probably the greatest women's match in WWE history, these women would become the first to ever main event a WWE event when they faced off in a crazy 30-minute Iron Woman match. Changing women's wrestling forever and bringing more eyes on female wrestling than ever before. Fans began to dream of the feuds that could occur when these women were called up. What kind of matches would they have? Who would win? Could they produce the next Trish vs. Lita feud we'd all been waiting for?
Now I want this revolution here in WWE. Paige wants this revolution, but Paige, courage can't do it by itself. So joining Paige right now is Becky Lynch.
Oh boy. Ladies and gentlemen, if you watch NXT on the WWE Network, you're very familiar with this young lady.
Oh, okay. We're just gonna bring everyone up in teams instead of giving them individual storylines that would get them familiar with the crowd. Kind of weird, but hey, everyone loves a good faction.
So joining forces with Paige will be a woman who was bred for this business, Charlotte!
And you hear the whoos! That has become, this young lady is the daughter of the two-time WWE Hall of Famer, the Nature Boy, Ric Flair.
Oh, so these factions are gonna be randomly put together and ignore all the bad blood developed between the wrestlers in NXT? A little weird, but hey, I bet they have cool group names. Meanwhile, the NXT women's division would once again reinvent itself. Now being centered around the undefeated, newly debuted Asuka. It became very clear that there was simply a difference in philosophy in the way women were booked in WWE and the way they were booked on NXT. Whether it be Bostoners throwing tea into the ocean, or Khabib throwing punches at Conor McGregor's team, everyone eventually reaches the boiling point sometime. And for the WWE Universe, that point was February 23rd, 2015. After a disrespectfully short 30-second match between Paige, Emma, and the Bella Twins, the WWE fans had enough, and they would finally take to Twitter trashing the WWE for the way they had chosen to portray women for the past decade, using the hashtag #GiveDivasAChance. In one of the most badass moves of her career, AJ Lee would even directly call out Stephanie McMahon via Twitter, saying the Divas were underpaid and underpromoted on TV. What a badass. It was clear all this was having an effect on the one thing Vince McMahon loves in life. What? No, not the audience, his paybook. Seeing dollar signs flash before his eyes, Vince himself would publicly acknowledge a shift in women's wrestling. And the Diva era, as we know it, was history. In the past few years, the WWE female superstars have made monumental progress. In 2016, Charlotte Flair and Sasha Banks would become the first women to ever main event a WWE pay-per-view at that year's Hell in a Cell. In 2017, we would see the first women's Money in the Bank ladder match. In 2018, the WWE would put on Evolution, the first all-women's pay-per-view in company history. The show was extremely well received, with many calling it the best of the year. But all these accomplishments pale in comparison to the women finally main eventing WrestleMania this year. And with Becky Two Belts now firmly positioned as one of the faces of the company, it seems like the sky is the limit for the women's division. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you haven't followed me on Facebook and Instagram yet,
you are a disgrace! You will never bring your family honor